Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Welcome. I am here representing the GeekEd Collective, who puts on this series of panels here in the library on Sundays at Comic-Con. We've been doing it for many years now, and we're really happy that folks made their time to come over and see us. We understand how far we are from the convention center, so we very much appreciate folks making the trek. We have a great series of panels for you today. We're very excited, and so to kick us off, I will bring up David Surratt.
Thank you, Al. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and good morning. Thanks for kicking off a fantastic group of conversations we expect to have this morning and afternoon with our GeekEd series and some distinguished colleagues. So my name is Dr. David Surratt. I serve as Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at the University of Oklahoma. Now, as Vice President and Dean, I navigate the chaos of campus life. We help to turn disasters into degrees. We often serve as the university's problem solver in chief. So I'm honored to moderate this panel as we explore our first GeekEd topic for the day is Crisis on Earth Prime. We're going to be exploring some things about how the events of the last few years have been much like some of the often read stories we have with one dramatic moment after another. And so I was inspired to think about actually a reference to a quote and a conversation interaction in Disney's Mulan, right? So Mulan is speaking to the emperor following her victory in battle, and the emperor says, I've heard a lot about you, Mulan. You stole your father's armor, you ran away from home, you impersonated a soldier, deceived your commanding officer, dishonored the Chinese army, destroyed my palace, and you have saved us all. So this idea and this response to adversity and crises can be complicated, messy, difficult, and it can find us in a place where we have to find some unique powers and ways in which we utilize our resources in different circumstances. So, but fear not, because today, our panelists with me today are going to be sharing some of their wisdom and often inspired by fandom and pop culture, represented by their experiences with Comic-Con too. So we're going to explore some themes of leadership, resilience, creativity, adaptability, et cetera, and meeting them. So grab your capes and harness your power of reflection while I introduce our panelists today, too. So I'm going to start with Dr. Marcelle Hayashida. She's Associate Vice Chancellor for Wellness, Health, and Counseling Services at UC Irvine. Licensed clinical psychologist and health and wellness coach. She's someone who also has a background in research of experiences focused on African American mental health, Black women in higher education, and college student mental health. So Dr. Hayashida is also an avid reader, enjoys yoga, watching shows like Loki, the Breaking Bad universe, Upload, Yellow Jackets, and the Inside Out movies. So welcome, Dr. Hayashida. Give her a round of applause. Next, I want to say hi to Kohya Lu. So Kohya is our inaugural ombudsperson for the College of San Mateo. He provides confidential resources for student issues and collaborates on DEI initiatives on campus. He's an award-winning speaker and consultant who ties pop culture into his work and presentations on a regular basis. This is his first time with our GeekEd Collective as a presenter and panelist, so I'm glad he's here with us today. With interests in Disney, Star Trek, Star Wars, manga, musical theater, Marvel, and more. So give it up for Kohya. And last but not least, Zuleika Bravo is joining us as well. So Zuleika is Assistant Director for the UCLA Grad Student Resource Center. She's someone who's dedicated to supporting college access for graduate students, believes in sharing her own experiences to inspire others, which is why in her professional and personal life, she shares about her experiences, including that as a non-traditional student attending college while raising a child, both in a professional role, but also as a geek educator with interest in her work of a series on mommy comics that she shares on social media. She's big into fandom and pop culture, enjoys streaming shows, playing video games with her daughter, and also recharging with naps, which I love a good nap. Naps are amazing. So give it up for Zuleika. So welcome, glad y'all are here. We'll kick it off a little bit, and this is a question open to all of our panelists to share, and I'll start with Kohya. But so if we're watching Higher Ed, the movie or the series, or we can make it an animated series to make it a little less dramatic, if we are watching this movie, what's it about, and where are we at in the plot? So I'm gonna start with Kohya, then Marcelle and Zuleika.
Hello. So what I was thinking about was it feels like we have new showrunners right now, and we've kind of gone into a bit of a spin-off. And part of it is, higher ed, it's the best of us, but also the worst of us. I feel like we've seen a lot in the higher ed landscape and what is affecting us currently. And I think current events definitely play a part in that. So one of the things that I think, in order to be proactive of what's to come, is the upcoming election, right? So in our 24-hour news cycle, there is so much that is changing literally daily with what things are going to look like in November. And I think that a lot of our students are going to come back. They're going to want to know, what's going on. They're going to want to voice their opinions. And with that, we have to look at, some fundamental aspects of that, including, safety, security, the freedom of speech along with that. So I feel like that's where we're currently in. It's like, we're at that stage where we're forming our team together and figuring out, all right, how are we going to deal with this next crisis that's on the horizon? So I feel like we have new showrunners, and they're trying to tell us, all right, here's how we're going to handle and navigate that.
Yeah, several showrunners, all kinds of producers in the background trying to set up their own packs and all that kind of thing, too. Yes, absolutely. I can see that. Yes, Marcelle.
All right. Does this work?
I think it should be on. Just
Oh, it's
pull
already
close.
on.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
So I think where
There
we
you go.
are is this is a Marvel movie, and my understanding is that, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, you get powers, right? You acquire powers, as opposed to having been born as, Wonder Woman or Superman or whatever. So we're at the part where the superhero is getting these really cool powers, administrators and students. I think the students really got this amazing power of empathy from the pandemic, right? I'd never heard people talking about folks with autoimmune issues and their vulnerabilities. Students have really cared a lot about that. They got some empathy powers. But we're at the point in the movie where the superheroes are bumping into things. They're Hulk, they've outgrown their clothes a little bit. They're disobeying Tony Stark a little bit. We're not quite sure how we're gonna harness our newly found superpowers. So the students, unfortunately, didn't do a great job negotiating during this past series of the encampment issue. Some campuses, students did a really good job, and others, their demands were not quite realistic or reasonable. And administrators, too, I think, are acquiring some new powers because of the pandemic, but then maybe squandered them a little bit, couldn't find a way to articulate how anti-Semitism and Islamophobia were both wrong, and that free speech is still good, right? Like, we really couldn't find a way to get on the same page and kind of harness our power. So I'm hoping in the second part of this plot here, we can join forces against some of the forces that seek to destroy higher ed, and they are numerous, by the way. I'm hoping we can come together and kind of vanquish higher ed's foes, but we're at the part right now where we're still kind of figuring out how to really harness our powers. And I think the name of this movie is The Last of Us. I know that title is already taken, but I don't know if you've been reading the Chronicle or Inside Higher Ed, colleges are closing one after another. There are, budget issues, enrollment difficulties. So this could really be the last of higher ed, I think, as we know it, unless we kind of come together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and there's probably lots of dormant things that have come up as a number of stories to tell us about how even trauma kind of impacts us and informs the way we change and evolve. So I definitely can see how that's coming up for us. Zuleika, what do you think?
Yeah, of course. I think to add on to Marcelle's, in addition to, the students receiving this power of empathy, I think they've also received the power of self-advocacy. I think throughout this year, they've learned that they do have power in their voice. And I think that on top of the election, I think higher education is gonna have to learn how to regain the students' trust. I know that this year, just being in the position that I'm in, I interact with students every day, and they've lost their trust in us, right? And I think throughout this year, on top of the election, higher ed and administrators are gonna have to learn how to rebuild that trust with working with middle management, because we are the ones who talk to students every day. We know what they're going through. We understand, the issues that they're going through, but we also understand the strengths that they bring to the table. And I feel like sometimes, because administrators don't often meet with students, they kind of lose that sight, right? That the students can be a strength. And as you mentioned, Marcelle, working together to fight that one foe that I feel like has been lost throughout the year because of the many, issues that we've been facing on top of, trying to look into the future. So I think that is something that we're gonna have to definitely look into, is rebuilding that trust with our students, and how can we come together and use that strength against that one foe, like you said, especially with the election coming up.
Yeah, the notion of trust, I think, has been a theme constantly in managing crises or responding to adversity all the time, especially with an organization that has so many people, right? Human beings involved. You've got to be able to communicate and build that trust for sure. Kohya, you mentioned about sort of this cycle of this series going into election season and kind of what the impacts could be for our campuses and communities. So, and Zuleika hit on it, right, about that sense of trust and connection and communication with our communities, especially our students. So what do you expect to happen or see between now and, say, November during the presidential election cycle? How do we see students engaging, and what are the most prominent issues that we should be considering in our work on college campuses? And this is for anybody that wants to jump in on that one.
Well, I think the big one is definitely going to be safety. I think what we've seen with the encampments, this at the end of this past semester was, how do we keep everybody safe? How do we keep things in a contained environment as much as possible? How can we, as administrators, support our students, but then also as leaders, toe the line between what our roles are? And I think that we're still going to be grappling with that a little bit. I think it's still fresh in our minds, but the question that a lot of us should be asking is, what have we learned? Or what can we take away, both good and bad, from that experience and apply that to what's coming?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think it's been a really big challenge about balancing that too, because when we talk about the trust levels with our students, trust hasn't always included how do we mobilize typical safety measures like police or engaging with folks that way. It's been a challenge, both politically and operationally in so many different ways too. I don't know if there's other comments about that experience from other panelists.
Yeah, I've honestly thought of like the Jedi Council, how administration is the Jedi Council, and we're sort of like training our Padawans, which are the students, and it's like we're looking at the Empire, but we're not like really interested in them, but they're like slowly coming in, trying to take over, and it's like, how about we just focus on working together, as you mentioned, right? And really see how can we stop the Empire that is imminent, right, and coming in, so.
Yeah, so in my background, so before I was at Oklahoma, I was at UC Berkeley, and we used to joke about sort of like the $3 million table, which was all these executive officers who would come together in the event of a protest or demonstration, then figure out then how do we sort of overlord our decisions on what the university has to do. And it becomes super complicated, and if you don't take the time to invite the conversations with student leaders or staff who are actually doing direct service and have those relationships and trust, it becomes really a huge gap in decision-making for universities too. So that's important, for sure. So I want to lean into a little bit something about, Marcelle mentioned about the idea of secret identities and powers that become revealed, and I know that Kohya and Zuleika might have some thoughts about this. So in times of crisis, many of us have had secret identities and powers revealed to us, even the way we support students and what they share with us, but also unmasking our own skills, powers that we discover from ourselves in the event of a crisis. So in that time, can you talk about some of the things that you've had revealed to you or in your leadership or from others, right? And then what were some unexpected skills that you've developed or unmasked or discovered as a result of a crisis? I'll start with Zuleika, and I'm going to hit Kohya.
Yeah, I feel like throughout this year, I really leaned on community cultural wealth from Dr. Yoso, which really highlights the different wealth that non-traditional students bring into academia. And whether that's navigational wealth, right? Someone who's first gen, who's never been through the process, comes in, and they bring that navigational wealth with them. And what I've learned is that I can use this superpower to empower students in their own experiences, especially students of color, students who come from underserved communities, because I came from that same background. Going back to school at the age of like 25 and then graduating at the age of 31, like I'm not the traditional student, right? Especially as a mother. And so what I learned throughout this year is I can usually use that experience and empower students to use their voice and to use that. And I feel like empowering those students is kind of giving them their own superpower. Like, hey, I come from these experiences, I come from these backgrounds, I can definitely use this right, in different spaces in academia and use my voice and be heard. So I feel like that was the superpower I gained and kind of gave back to the students.
Awesome. Other thoughts from the other panelists, actually, or Kohya?
So in my role as ombudsperson, it's the one confidential place on campus where you're able to talk about any issue that might be going on. So with that, I feel like the skill that I had previously is empathy. But I feel like if there are any One Piece fans in the house, we're headed into like gear 5 of that. Creating that safe space for students to be able to talk about, what's going on. It's not just that, right? It's always something else beneath the surface. So I think that establishing that foundation of trust, learning a little bit more about them and what they're initially coming to me with, but then looking at, what are some of the other issues at play or other barriers that are in the way of your holistic experience as a student on campus. So whether that's basic needs like housing insecurity, food insecurity, financial hardship. I also work with, a lot of students from marginalized communities and students of color. So I think that, being able to give students that breath and that space to really open up and kind of come into their own and share with me is something that is just really impactful, because I think when students come to campus, they're still trying to figure out who they are, right, and what their identity and what their powers might be. So I think when they have folks who can really tap into and build that trust, like I love that you had said that earlier, I think that really resonates with students, especially when they can see that representation as well. Real quick, earlier, I loved your Jedi Council metaphor, but one thing that we also know about the council is that they're not always right? So just because they're in power or because they are the people that people look to doesn't necessarily mean that we always have all the answers or that we're always on the side of good. We might have the best of intentions, but sometimes I think the impact of what happens can fall a little short for our students as well. But I would say, empathy and trust are definitely two key things that I see that I am really kind of honed in on as I work with students right now.
Yeah, just hearing and seeing the looks on your faces too about that, it makes you wonder, is there a particular story or student engagement or experience that you can think about, maybe in more detail, without, of course, sharing, confidential information? I'm kind of curious, what's some examples of that engagement interaction where you saw as a success story and the outcomes? Kind of curious for many of the panelists. Sorry, so I'm throwing this out. This is an impromptu question.
So I had a student that had come and they were having an issue with a fellow classmate through a project. And one of the things that I had talked about was, okay, so based on what you're telling me, here's the issue, here's what's important to you, which is being able to work well with, your group on your project. But one of the things that we can do is, we can take a look at, would you like to, have a conversation with your group mates about what's not working? If everybody agrees, I can help, facilitate and mediate that conversation. But if you want to, then here are some things that we can do. And I think that one of the things that the student had this aha moment was, wait, there are ways in which I can approach conflict, resolution and mediation. And I'm also a big Star Wars fan, so I've done presentations on Star Wars and conflict mediation in terms of how Jedi approach conflict and some of the things that they do. My office is decorated kind of like a Comic-Con office. There's a lot that kind of represents the things that I like, and it's kind of geeky, but it also creates this space for students to be like, okay, this isn't just, your any old administrative office. But as I was relating it to different areas of pop culture, they were like, I know that, I can do that. Or they were like, I understand what that is. So I think that, just being able to share things in a way that really kind of met the student where they were. And they had also shared some of the things that they enjoyed, right, when we were first starting our conversation. So, I was like, well, just do it like this or think like this character. And they were like, wow, like, I want to do that. And then I want to report back and see how it went. And I was like, go to it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
all you,
Drop the template. Make sure you drop that template too. And you're right. The idea of having hard things in accessible ways to approach the work is really valuable, especially when we talk about just talking about fandom and connecting with students in different ways, and just giving them a different language to talk about their issues or problems or concerns. I also appreciate too when you all talked about empathy perspective. I think when we talked about the idea, especially after the pandemic, of all of us experiencing this global form of trauma, right? One of the things I know a lot of conversations we were focused on was how do we give a sense of agency in a time when people felt like they had no agency in certain circumstances, especially when it came to public health. So I think that's a great context for sure in bringing that up. So speaking of the pandemic, we talked about oftentimes this experience with the pandemic that it was likened to the blip, right? So you had the snap of Thanos' fingers warping our sense of time and reality. The last couple years feels like 5 or 6. So curious, what do you all think of that comparison? And are there any parallels between what's happened in the Marvel Universe and our real lives? And so I would like to invite Marcelle and Kohya to offer some comment there.
Thanks.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is the perfect parallel. I remember at the time people saying, well, I'll see you in a couple of weeks, right? So things, right? I'm just going to let this die down. Things happened so quickly. I remember, we're just sort of talking, and then we got an email and it was like, get out, leave. So things happened quickly. We didn't have any way to know it was coming. And then what happened was we had a couple of years at Irvine where we didn't really see the students, and we were getting older. But I think in a lot of ways, they weren't. They were having these experiences, but they were paused developmentally in some really important ways. So a 17-year-old who might normally have been going to prom and graduation and navigating conflict, I think lost a couple of years, right? And they were not able to do that. And so when they came back, similar to the blip, right? Like we got older and they didn't, and they're kind of coming back, having gone through this incredible, horrific experience without the kind of skills that they may have developed ordinarily at 17, 18, 19, or 20. And then we didn't really have any rituals, right? So these were refugees when they came back after the blip. They would lost their housing, people had died, they lost their jobs. And something very similar, I think, happened to students where they come back and things are different, and we didn't really have any rituals to receive them back. We just said, get back to school, give us your money, and then get back to work, right? So I think that kind of happened too. And we didn't really give them rituals to grieve either, right? There's just a lot of trauma, a lot of loss that the folks coming back after the blip didn't get, students really didn't get either. So I think that the similarities and parallels are kind of perfect. And I think what we didn't do well, which we still have a chance to do, is to think about reintegration. What does that really mean? It's not too late. Again, there's a lot of political upheaval. People are going through a lot of conflict. How do we help our communities really come together? We still have an opportunity to kind of get it right.
Yeah, even and driving the conflict that was even self-inflicted half the time too, where we couldn't agree on common assumptions on a lot of different things, whether it be public health interventions, whether certain types of interventions worked medically or not, all those being fraught, and a lot of that additional layers, right? So for sure, absolutely. Kohya, thoughts?
I think on the flip side, for the staff and faculty perspective, we also experienced that blip, right? And I think that we were just talking even amongst ourselves as a panel the other day where, I have a hard time figuring out what happened when within the last 4 years. It just seems like a blur. There was just so much that happened, and sometimes I'm like, wait, was that only last year? Was that 3 years ago? I don't remember. And I think that for us, we had to also acclimate to a new landscape, right? Like, if we're looking at the MCU, our sacred timeline was essentially affected, and then we started branching out into all these other things. And I think that we also had to contemplate with our new professionals, like our graduate students who are graduating and starting to enter our field, because they also were being affected in terms of going through their program in an amalgamated way or through a computer screen. And I think that a lot of our professionals, particularly in the area of housing and residence life, they had to deal with a lot of different things, right? Because we still had some students on campus, depending on some universities or colleges, and with that, they had to change their job description, or they had to do things that maybe they wouldn't have been asked to do in a regular situation. So I think that has also had an impact on our profession in terms of the people that we need, that next generation. But then also that old school mentality, or that Jedi Council that's saying, you know what, all this will pass and we'll get back to how higher education used to run. We are, a sacred tradition that has been, in existence for hundreds of years, and we will get back to exactly how we did it before. And I think what we are still kind of grappling with is that higher ed is not the same as it was in 2020, and it continues to evolve. And we have to evolve with that because our students are evolving. And I think sometimes we're still kind of coming against this, different schools of thought where you have one side who thinks this way and then another who's like, well, we need to be more progressive and actually meet the students where they're at. And I think that we're still kind of butting heads a little bit. So that I think is going to be continue to be the forefront of a lot of different conversations as we continue to navigate where we currently are.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's factions constantly being built politically, especially around that we suffer just unintended consequences about that, whether it be whether you're in a state that's more conservative or progressive, and how the policies then impact how you do your work. I remember even whenever I was trying to organize a move-in, and I had phone calls as a dean of students, and on one side, there were people who were saying it is immoral for you to even open your doors to this university, and then the others are basically saying, I refuse to wear a mask during move-in because I don't believe this is more than the flu. So balancing those things during the pandemic was huge. And so, yeah, there was a certain sense of lost time and reality at times for sure that I know a lot of higher ed folks felt for sure. So speaking of that kind of feeling of the impact on us as staff, how we were navigating that, right? So how do you use fandom to promote a sense of self-care and mental health, whether it be among students or even ourselves as staff members or faculty members we work with during and after a crisis? How do you use that fandom to promote self-care and mental health for yourselves? So I'm going to start with Marcelle a little bit and jump in. And I'd love to invite Kohya, but also Zuleika, if you have any thoughts about this too, feel free to jump in. Yeah.
Well, so for me personally, it's just like an escape, right? Getting on the couch after a long day and not being an administrator is kind of great. But I think for students, watching the same shows over and over again is just really comforting to a lot of people, right? Things are so unpredictable right now politically that when you can kind of go, I know exactly how this ends, right? I know where the jokes are, and they're hilarious, and they're going to kill every time. And there's something really lovely about predictability and routine and ritual and predictability. But I would also say too, I used to listen to my dad talk on the phone with his mom, my grandmother. And he came from a very large family. And so we would talk about the cousins and the grandchildren. He would talk about this. And then she would say, and Victor Newman, this is not really going well in the company, I don't know. And that was from The Young and the Restless. Okay?
I was like, I know this. I know this, Young and the Restless. Okay, okay.
And she would kind of come in and out, and she obviously knew this was not our family, okay? This is not dementia here, but the social connections that were real in her life were just as real on television as they were in real life, right? And so I think it's true. There's actually a psychologist in Buffalo, Shira Gabriel, who says this is a real phenomenon that social situations in real life, right, do the same things for our brain that getting into fictionalized universes do. It's kind of fascinating that we didn't evolve to know the difference between television, movies. Like, we don't have enough evolutionary history to have brains that kind of go, all right, this is real, this is fiction, this isn't. We know it, but it hits the same way regardless of whether it's fiction or not. So I think for students, when you can think about, well, how would you react in this situation? Fictional, but it gets your brain doing the same things that it would do in real life. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. So engaging with students about their fandom, about how their characters that they watch would respond or react, I think it helps a lot for the social and developmental aspects that I think were lost a little bit during the pandemic. It's not saying that watching a movie is the same thing as having a real relationship. That's not the same. But I think some of the same skills can be taught. And then also then you connect with the other people who are fans in real life or virtually, and that's another aspect of social support. So I think that there's just a lot of really beautiful ways to use fandom to connect with people.
Hey, look, Victor Newman's been coming with some heat on social media lately, so I'm down with that for sure. And I'm pretty sure, like, there was times where I really wish I was friends with all the Golden Girls. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, I'm with you. There's some satisfaction for that too. Other thoughts?
think, there's something to be said about the comfort of things that you already know. And I think that right now there's so much content out there that, sometimes like, I could watch the latest Buzzy show, or I could watch The West Wing for the 100th time, and it's comfortable for me. Or, during the pandemic specifically, like Friends, everybody was watching Friends, right? Because it was a sitcom, you could escape from it, it was funny. And then newer viewers were coming into the fold with Friends, right? Like, I remember when Friends was like originally on, but I'm not gonna date myself, but I think even, when we're looking at film, IP, intellectual property, this summer, Twisters, Ghostbusters, Planet of the Apes. There's a new Alien movie coming out. It's what can you do with something that is recognizable, either as a brand or a fandom, and then how can you bring, hopefully a new generation or new set of viewers into the mix. So I feel like, it's calculated, right? Because these studios, they want to make money, but then also they're trying to appeal to fans. Maybe it's not always successful in terms of fan service, or maybe you have folks who are just going to say, we're going to do something completely new, and hopefully the fans will come with us with the risks that we're taking. But, even last night, RDJ is back in the MCU. The Russo brothers are back in the MCU. That's familiar to fans. So
I'm getting so many texts about that.
Right?
There's like, they're like, how's this work? My wife is the worst about it. She'll be like, hey, I don't understand. I was upset when he's gone. Like, y'all bring it back? How can you do this? I was like, there's a lot of things and ways in comics for that. Sorry, to interrupt. Yeah.
No,
but
for sure.
I've been getting texts about it last night. I was
But
like,
then
look,
there's that
multiverses are a
sense
thing.
amongst the fandom where it's like, okay, I feel like we can breathe now. We're going to be in good
Yes.
hands. And there's that trust
Yes.
that comes with that, right? So I
Yes.
think, when we need to escape from our jobs, or when students need to escape from, some of their realities, similar to what you were saying, it's different in a fictionalized context, but there is that comfort and escape there.
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. Other reactions, I don't know if I want to make sure you're like, you're good.
No, yeah, kind of going off of the nostalgia that both of you mentioned, I know that during the pandemic and kind of within the transitionary period of like coming back, in order for us to kind of build community with students, it was kind of hard because it was virtual, right? And so what we thought of is like, what about Among Us? Like everyone's playing Among Us, let's play Among Us. And it's kind of, I bring it back to the nostalgia because it's kind of like a reinvention of Mafia. And people are familiar with that type of concept. So we did that, we did Super Smash Brothers, and people loved it because they were able to, talk to each other, build community. And I feel like it made it a little bit easier coming back, transitioning back, because they built that, that trust in each other during that time. So it kind of brings it back to the nostalgia and how it does comfort us in that self-care.
Oh yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I love the references, the notion of predictability and that nostalgia from the shows are familiar. Gaming communities were definitely big for sure that were jumping up, especially. I remember when I called my wife and I said, hey, for research purposes, I need a PS5. And so I said, I need to know more about esports, about what's going on. So next thing I know, I'm jumping on, I'm on Call of Duty, I'm hanging out with some friends, and it was a time, right? And so yeah, you find those things of familiarity, of community, and just kind of connection, trying to kind of make your way through for sure. I think that's powerful for sure. So, what are some other kind of characters from your fandom culture that you've called upon in times of these challenges, right? So I was kind of curious, who are those characters? This is for all the panelists. Who are those characters, and then what were some of the lessons that you learned from them about either leadership or things that you needed to take from those leadership lessons for yourself? So I'm gonna start with Marcelle, and then Zuleika, and then we'll hit Kohya.
Okay, so there's a few. Pia Bose, who's in the audience, wrote this great little article about Ted Lasso and with a colleague and leadership. And so I think Ted Lasso was on the rotation during the pandemic. And what I will do is if somebody comes at me, I will match that energy. And so I have learned that maybe I don't always have to come at them with the same energy, that I can kind of be like nice. And maybe extra nice. And so, bake them cookies and give them to every day. I don't do that. But like sometimes,
But you could.
I
yes.
could, right? So sometimes the best way to get them is to kill them with kindness. And so I think that's some of the leadership tips that we can get from Ted. But it's not just Ted, right? It's all the other characters, right? And so I've had people that I've hired who've gone from, player to coach, right? So who've gone from, team member to director, and so there's some lessons from Ted Lasso there as well. But believe it or not, I think The Bear also has some really great leadership lessons. Now, not
I was like,
Carmen.
say more.
Not Carmen
Yeah,
himself.
I was like, I'm anxious even hearing about Carmen. Okay.
Yeah, people get stabbed, like it's not good. But I think one thing that we learned from The Bear, there's a bunch of things actually, and one is like Olivia Colman's character, right? Calm, chill, excellent. And you don't have to torture people, right, to get a star, right, to be really good. And that is, I think, one of the central questions in the show, right? Like, can you be excellent and have a life and a relationship and a family, or do you have to be driven and hard? And I love how Olivia Colman says, you know, I'm out, I'm piecing out. That is goals for me. Like, come out on top, and then go do something else with your life. You don't have to drive yourself into the ground to be an excellent. So there's some, I think, lessons there. Also, you know, as dysfunctional of a workplace as that is, the back of the house, it is not that dissimilar to higher ed, I'll be honest with you, okay? So,
That's
you know,
fair.
the show is supposedly about a restaurant, but the show is also about being an adult child of an alcoholic, right? That's what the show is kind of really about. Carmen and his sister, and Jamie Lee Curtis's character, and she just plays that so beautifully. But the perfectionism and the anxiety that comes from surviving that kind of family, everybody in your workplace potentially has a similar story, right? Has lost a parent, has a parent who had a mental illness, had a parent who whatever. And so people are coming into the workplace with all kinds of traumas, and I don't think we really talked about that. We talk about the superficial and how things look on the outside, but the back of the house, a lot of what I do on a weekly basis is, hey, can you guys be a little nicer to each other? Can you stop, you know, gossiping? Can you, like, that's the work that I actually do as an administrator, managing all the trauma that people bring into the workplace. So there's a lot about The Bear. Yellow Jackets is my last thing. I've been kind of obsessed with that show lately.
Let's
and
see where this
sometimes-
goes.
Sometimes you gotta, you know, butcher things that you love, okay? If anybody watches the show, it's about cannibalism, okay? So sometimes you gotta cut things, you gotta do budget cuts, you've gotta make really tough decisions, you gotta hurt people, sometimes in the greater good, so that everybody can survive. And that's one of the things that I'm learning.
He says,
I sacrifice for you, yes, exactly, for all of humanity.
yes, Thanos, thank you. Yes, sorry, I got lost in that one. I was like, your
Yeah,
thoughts?
Those are really great ones. When I think of like leadership, I really think of like the Punisher, Frank Castle, and how I'm just kidding, that's a joke. No, absolutely not.
I was like, I'm a ride with you right now. I'm gonna stick with you. I'm on this ride. I've already put my seatbelt on. I'm good. Like,
I
let's
saw
see
some
what happens.
nods. You're like, okay. Right. I mean, he's a great character. But no, I really think I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, and kind of like I was mentioning the Jedi Council and how they're not always right. But one of the characters that really sticks out is Ahsoka, and just like what she's gone through and how she's just so wise beyond her years, and like having someone like Anakin be her master, and then losing him, and then her trying to navigate that, but also being so calm. I try to use that in working with students and with administrators, because as someone who's like in middle management, I have to be in the middle a lot of the times when trying to navigate, right? Like, hey, listen to the students, but also, hey, students, you can't really do that. There's ways around it, right? There's a way to guide them, right, towards the right path, or, you know. So I really think of Ahsoka, and then the second person that really pops into my mind is Storm. I feel like Storm from X-Men, she really was kind of like the right-hand person to Professor Xavier, and every time like he kind of doubted himself, he would always go to her and see like, hey, you know, how does this sound? And I try to be that person when it comes to administration, right? Like, hey, what are the students saying? What can we do to support them? And just having that listening ear, trying to be open, trying to listen to both sides, but also being the voice of reason, if that's possible. But yeah, that's definitely where I guess the leadership that I seek really goes to is those two folks.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Kohya.
For me, it would be from Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, Captain Christopher Pike. I feel like his style of leadership is really, he'll pause before he makes a decision. He'll incorporate the opinions and perspectives of his crew. He's, willing to take risks and believe in others, and, take the responsibility for that as the captain. So I feel like, the way that he goes about it is just really in a charismatic and cool way, but he's also very smart and intelligent. So, those are things that I definitely, try to emulate as a leader whenever I can. But.
Yeah. When I hear a lot of conversation, I hear a ton of leadership lessons across all these fandoms for sure. For me, I in the Star Trek universe, Michael Burnham has been someone I've been watching really closely in Discovery. That's been really, really fun to watch that character develop. And I think one of the big things for me was even the nature of the lack of finality of mistakes and your ability to focus on making amends with yourself before being able to lead becomes a powerful thing. There's so many people at all levels of higher education that I think oftentimes are so focused on trying to figure out how to direct or lead others or do and influence others that they haven't taken the time to know who they are first to even lead properly, right? So I love what you all shared. I'm going to take some great lessons for sure from that. The bear stresses me out, I'm not going to lie. Not gonna lie. The other template that I find really accessible is Inside Out, honestly. And so there's times where I can anthropomorphize my emotions in that moment. I'm like, I'm anger right now, and I'm picturing him in his little flame. So that comes up a lot for sure too. So we're running close to time, but I wanted to. Invite the audience for one, think about some questions that you might have for our panelists. But as you are thinking about those questions too, invite you to just also interact with some of our flash round, our speed round of questions too. So if you want to even just raise your hand real quick and we have a response to some of the questions I'm going to pose to my panelists during our flash round, like 15 to 30 seconds or less. So I'm going to just go ahead and kick it off. And so just anyone wants to respond. Your top leadership tip for navigating a crisis. What are some thoughts in 30 seconds or less? Go, panelists.
Yeah, it's not a crisis. That's my first tip.
It's not a crisis.
It really isn't. If somebody died, then maybe. But even then, it's kind of too late.
You're like this career center crisis. Is it really a crisis?
People really do manufacture crises in higher ed.
That's fair.
All
That's
the time.
fair.
And so that's maybe my top tip.
That's
it's
fair.
not really a crisis.
Good stuff. I'm looking around. Any other responses?
Listening and being flexible.
Excellent. Yeah.
Reread the email before you hit send.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've taken walks from my emails for sure. A resource, book, podcast, some kind of tool that's been invaluable to you in your response to crises.
Yeah, it's an obscure little book, but it's called Centered Leadership by Barsh and Cranston. I was really obsessed with that book about a dozen years ago. And the idea is that leaders are not necessarily born. There's lots of people who are naturally charismatic and who have leadership qualities either from birth, but most of us acquire these skills, and it's not just about being in charge, but how do you balance your energy and, on the couch, what are you watching, what are you doing, do you play the piano, do you cook, how do you become a whole person? How do you get meaning from the work that you do? So centered leadership is, I think.
Centered leadership, got it. Other thoughts? Invaluable tools, resource.
There's a podcast called Blank Check. So they talk about different works or movies that directors have done, and they talk about different behind-the-scenes things, and then they'll also have celebrity guests who are also in the film industry commenting on things. But what I really like about that podcast is that you can learn a lot of things, but you can also learn a lot of lessons behind maybe more tumultuous productions or successful productions. So when I'm in the car or I'm just kind of doing cleaning or other things, I feel like there's a lot of takeaways that can apply to just, everyday situations as well.
Yeah, awesome. Zuleika, you good?
Does my switch count?
I like it. No, it's so true, though. It's so true. Pop culture storyline or series that you often refer to when you're teaching about crisis management? Anything popping up for you?
I feel like there's so many. Right?
DC Comics Identity Crisis. It's
Okay.
an oldie but a goodie.
Okay, okay. So for me, Black Panther. It's Ta-Nehisi Coates and his writing in that series has been my go-to for sure. Yeah. Audience members, I don't know if y'all have any thoughts about that. You good? Al, go ahead. Parks and Rec. Say more.
When I was doing my dissertation research, so many women in higher ed looked at Leslie Knope as a role model.
Uh-huh.
I had watched Parks and Rec, loved Parks and Rec, but I rewatched it from the perspective of a role model as a leader.
Got you.
Leslie Knope is top-notch.
So Leslie Knope as a role model and leader and rewatching it that way and reflecting on it. Love it. Very cool, very cool. So last couple questions. How do you unwind with your favorite fandom after a stressful or challenging day?
Yeah, I'll just say it's on the couch with my husband. That's kind of how I do it. Also, I give myself permission to watch. I'm a big Housewives franchise fan, and so I will let myself watch an hour of that if I'm on my exercise bike. So that's kind of the trade-off. Garbage.
You earned it. You earned it.
I love watching series based on video games because I like to see how close they are to the video game story. And I've been like enjoying that very much, like Halo or The Last of Us. Just trying to match it. I find it like a competition, kind of like, oh, they didn't get this right or they did this differently. Yeah.
Slightly judgmental. I like it. I like it. I'm with you. That's good.
I kind of feel that way about like comic, animated series or even movies. Like if it's like accurate or what did they change? So X-Men '97, they went through so much content or material
Ooh, yeah.
like in the one season. So I'm really interested. It was amazing, but I'm really interested to see where they're going to go with future seasons because they're just they did so much and they kind of beat like the cinematic universe, right, with the introduction. So you wonder what they're going to do differently with some of that. So, but yeah, I feel you on that.
Yeah, deeply emotional journey, X-Men '97, for sure, for sure. So we're getting close to time. I want to make sure I allow for any kind of Q&A from the audience. Any questions coming up for you all that you have for our panelists? Yeah, go for it.
So you talked a lot about trust. I heard trust come up in a few different answers. And I think higher ed's a really interesting place to consider trust because you don't really have two parties, right? Like in theory, you should have like students at the university, right? But within the university, the faculty and the administration rarely agree on things, right? And even within the faculty rarely agree on things. So I think that creates a really challenging environment to build trust. On top of a lot of other complications there. But I'm just curious, like bringing this back to the fandom piece of it, are there any fandoms that you've looked at that you say these are great models for building trust in such a complicated organization that I would use as an example?
So the question was about thinking about our fandom and how we use that to talk about the complexity of building trust in organizations and higher education. Great question. Thoughts? I see the heads turning on that one.
So for me, I would bring it back to the Jedi, like the good Jedi, who when they had their like stuff together before like things fell apart. But one of the things that about my position that's unique is that I'm an independent entity on campus, and I'm an informal resource, and then I'm also impartial. So I don't have a stake in either side. So when I meet with folks, it really is to develop, informed options and then to empower the individual to choose which option they think would be the best for them, right? And even with the administration, my job is also to identify systemic issues that are affecting, the campus as well as the students. So, when I'm approaching, the president of my college and saying, hey, here are some things that I think you need to be aware of, part of it is, I kind of use the analogy of I'm leaving this on your doorstep. I can't force you to pick up, the paper or the pie that I'm leaving you, but, I highly recommend that we take a look at this because these are some issues that have been identified, right? Or these are some themes that are there. So when I look at fandom, I feel like, the Jedi, typically would go in and they would, negotiate on behalf of, the Republic or the government and look at, different things. But their thing would usually be, we won't intervene unless we have to defend ourselves or unless absolutely necessary. We can, and we know that we're there, but we're supposed to be peacekeepers of the galaxy, right? So that's kind of where I would tie that into what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking Avengers, the scene, they're all coming together and they're in the air and they're on the ground and they're all trying to come together, I think for leadership at the university level, it's not just about like who's in charge. Obviously the chancellor, the president's in charge, but everybody has a role to play. And maybe that's a nice way of thinking about all of our contributions.
Great. So I just got the signal that we are at time. So I want to say thank you all for being here with us today. Before I wrap up, I actually have a couple things. So thanks for the brave ones who asked questions for sure, offer comment. Al, I love you, bro. I'm going to give this to you anyway still. I got you. So we've got Eddie Munson and the Captain America exclusive here too. So thank you all for your participation today. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for our beautiful panelists as well. Thank you so much. Great job.